As I thought through, talking about this, I thought there's actually 6 different characteristics of future missional writing that I think becomes important, and that's going to be my sort of outline that I will sort of walk through this. And so the first thing is just a very pithy kind of true statement that all writing is difficult. But I would suggest that future missiological writing is exponentially more difficult because there's so much at stake. It is social, it is theological, it is missionary in its force, and it is spiritual, and and it's probably in many ways the most difficult and yet the most important thing that I've done in my ministry. When I look backwards, I'm thinking when in 2004, I knew that I had a message, and I was in Toronto. I was planting churches. We were reaching multi-generationally unchurched secular people, and I was watching contemporaries try to plant churches in the same place and not really be successful in reaching that demographic, which was, largely the biggest chunk of the 7 million people that lived in the GTA Greater Toronto area. And I began to sort of muse, like, why is it that what are we doing differently than I'm watching other church plants doing? Because it wasn't like we had money or we were sexy or there was anything. And I began to notice that generationally unchurched secular people seem to be turned off to the church, but at the same time, they were not turned off to kingdom. They were actually warm to things that were kingdom. And most of the playbooks at the time had something to do with the buzzword back then was seeker sensitivity. In fact, the accoutrements of the whole seeker sensitivity movement were actually, I think, contributed to the distancing of generationally unchurched people towards the idea of the message of the good news or even the messenger. And so I began to sort of diagram what is going on. I came up with this concept that later became a book called The Kingdom Matrix. And it started off as a napkin in coffee conversations with church planters, trying to help reorient them to what they were doing. And then it became a conference kind of workshop, and then it finally ended up being a book. But the whole process of getting to that point was a very, very, very difficult process, and a lot of second guessing myself, just because of the things that I was writing and talking about, I'd not really seen in other people's writings, and so there was so much at stake. I remember when that book hit the press, I was really looking for some blowback, and it was interesting. That particular book became, of all the things I've ever written, is certainly outstripped and selling anything else that I've ever done. And then as I go around, sometimes speaking different places around the world, the testimonies that come from people saying, that changed my orientation. And so the first thing just to kind of pound the ground is, this is not easy, and yet it might be the most important thing, or one of the most important things that you can do in ministry. The second thing is that missiological writing opens minds to a new possibility of the future. And I think that becomes significant, because here's where the spiritual part comes in. Many of you are making decisions, spiritual decisions, about how you are approaching your ministry. And in many ways, it's spiritual intuition that's guiding your decision making. It's not things that you've seen other people do. I think that's one of the reasons why you were all invited to this conversation, is that that you are exploring ways that you're speaking of things and trying things you've not really seen other people do. And so somehow that idea, as it's proven as effective in bringing lost people to a saving knowledge of Christ, needs to be codified, and because it's going to open the minds of others. Matt Rogers, who's on this call, and I were working together on a B&H academic textbook on North American missiology. And when we started that book, basically we started listing 10, as we saw them, maladies of the evangelical culture. And then we went for each one of those, and we began to go in history and say, what decisions were made to cause us to think the way we think on each of those 10 areas. And then we began to look at the future and say, okay, what adjustments, what biblical adjustments do we need to make in order to actually reorient our thinking towards a biblical idea? And so we did a lot of work putting all of that together to that yet to be a published book with B&H. And I knew that people weren't going to get it. There was going to be a big percentage of people that are going to read through that, and it's not going to hit them in their hearts, and it's not going to actually move their idea. And so I said, I need to write down a parable, and it was going to be a little epilogue into that book at the very end to show these 10 principles woven into a real life situation. We did an inner city church in downtown Philadelphia. I did a lot of research with people in Philadelphia, make sure, and how it was a church that actually died and then grew into exploding into this global movement. And why did I do that? Well, I did it because I think unless people can see a picture, they have a hard time reorienting themselves to a new reality. And so as you began to think about the place that God has given you, to be thinking about how these new possibilities for the future need to be described in ways that are different than kind of got someone at my door, somebody who traditionally walks and makes those, kind of just regular trade book ideas. Somehow needs to be a different idea on that. So just think through that. There's a third principle, and that is, and Ed spoke to this earlier, that missiological writing is helping leaders understand two things: the whys and the whats. Not just the whys, nor just the whats, but both of those things. I shared earlier yesterday, as I introduced Alan Hirsch, that he was a guy who helped me get unstuck from a situation that I was in. And I think that missiology at its best is this bottom-up enterprise. It isn't this top-down enterprise where gurus are out there telling people how to do it, but no, it is looking and seeing the effectiveness of what's working. So you right now are perfectly positioned to draw a future roadmap for those who are going to be following you. And so I think pay a lot of attention to the things that you're doing. Make notes in journals. It's so easy to forget things, and yet sometimes the most important God stories that you have to celebrate are things that need to be codified and written. And so take the time to do that. There's a fourth thing, and that is just acknowledging that writing is a craft. It takes work. If you're not a reader, you probably shouldn't be a writer, for the reasons of even how things are put on a page. But more importantly than that is that you need a broader perspective than your own personal experience. If you're going to help articulate a path to the future, there's things that we have to learn from the experiences of others around us contemporaneously, as well as from history. And so you need to sort of, if you're not a reader now, get in the habit of reading, and because that's going to serve you very, very well in that process. And then on the writing side of that, I mean, it's repetitions. It's reps. You just get better. Words become your tools that help move things from like an IKEA catalog or an IKEA building a shelf kind of idea to actually creating the pathos and ethos inside of the hearts of people, choosing the words that are actually going to paint the pictures that cause an emotional response, to give them courage to take the steps of faith. I remember, just recently, as I was writing that little parable, Venal Dogmata, I thought, I've never written fiction before. I don't know how to write fiction. How do I learn to write fiction? And so what did I do? I went I went and paid my $200 and took a master's course and learned from some of the experts who were used to this and followed their ideas and wove that into them. And then I took my manuscript and I sent it to people who were fiction writers of some note and said, hey, can you take this? Can you grade it? Can you help me? And they gave me feedback. And this it was work. It wasn't just something that just came really, really easily. And so this idea, the whole idea is craft. Missiological writing at its best is kingdom influence. And I think about three things that are going to happen because of it. Number one is you're going to invent new language, because you have to invent new language, because the language we have is inadequate for the future that we have moving towards. Words are symbols. They're powerful tools, and the symbols that we have often are sullied with baggage that does not describe where we need to go. A perfect example of that is we were hiring Brad Briscoe to lead church bivocational church planting for us at the Send Network, and we knew we didn't want to call it bivocational, because bivocational kind of comes in two different ways. Sometimes it's a booby prize. I tried to win at something and didn't really happen, and now I have to get a job and I feel kind of bad. And we knew we had to get a different imagination. And I remember in 2015 back and forth with Brad, and when I suggested to him, instead of the word bi, let's use the word co-vocational, co meaning with, together, and two vocations together, no sacred secular divide, both working together. That was a new word in 2015, and now it is thrown around. It's part of our vernacular, and so we have to. Alan's another great example. Invents words, invents terms that help us redefine what the future is. So we invent new language, but then we also define the terms of engagement by our writing. Multiplying church is a great example. It's a word that it's a phrase we've talked about, but what does it mean? And it meant so many things to so many different people, and it wasn't a very powerful term. And so we thought, let's give it definition that is actually missiologically impactful. And we distinguish the difference between reproduction and multiplication. And reproduction being a church that would find a planter or a planting team from somewhere else and get behind it and go. But where are we going to see the genesis of movement happening? Somehow we're going to have to see churches taking responsibility for the people that they disciple, so that there could be a disciple-making movement where new church planting teams, co-vocational church planting teams, are discovered and developed and deployed from within and sent out. And so we, for us, redefine the idea of what multiplication is. Multiplication is an internal idea. It's a disciple-making idea, and it should be the heart of the church. And I was mentioning earlier, we measured how often we saw that happening in 2015 in our little tribe, and it was such a rare thing. We changed it, we gave it definition, and we found that definition. We began to see that actually change. That brings to the third thing. So we invent new language. We define the terms of engagement, and then we fan the flames of a kingdom movement that your name will never be attached to. And I think that might be maybe some of the most significant thing, is when we really having an opportunity to have a kingdom influence. There's so many things that you're going to look at and say, nobody's ever going to know this, but I thought of that. No one's ever going to know this, but I led something to happen here. I wrote about this. I inspired someone to think this, and your name's never going to be attached to it. And I think in that whole process, this whole, we started, Daniel did a great job starting us out. We start off with, where is our eyes set? Is it here, or is it a longer perspective that we're talking an eternal kind of a nature? And I think you'll find that the writing that God lets you become involved in, as it is following the spiritual intuition that you sense the Holy Spirit is leading you to, it is grounded in biblical truth, and it's grounded in historical reality. And you move forward in that, and you give a roadmap. People are going to pick that roadmap up, and they're not going to know where it came from, and they're going to follow it, and someone else is going to iterate from that, and they're going to change it again. And you're going to look back at some point and go, look at that, look at that, look at that, look at that. And you're going to smile in a sense like a happy grandfather watching the spiritual children, in a sense, or seed all over the place. And so this opportunity that God gives us in writing is significant. And for some of you that I'm talking to, and you know who you are, God's burning something in your spirit, in your soul, and you're saying, I think God's going to have that's going to be part of the ministry that I have for my future. And that ministry, sometimes in ways that you would never expect, has incredible kingdom impact. And so be faithful to the process, and just be surprised what God does through your life.
Jeff, that was tremendous. A lot of the things that you shared are the first times that I've heard you say those things, and I think this has been really helpful to younger budding writers. We've got a few minutes, Jeff. I want to ask a couple of questions. Are you okay with that?
Yeah.
And then this will probably give some more framework for the work group that's getting ready to come up here. Everybody was sent a copy of Vino Dogmata, and I think I said this to you in an email. Not very many people are writing about the future of the church. It's a hard thing to do because you don't want to get critiqued for it. And so you went the parable route. Like, why a parable? Why not try to be an actual, predictor of what's happening? Why do you think the parable is useful?
Yeah. So I in the parable, I embed what I think is a predictor of what is happening and going to be happening. But parables, I think, take the personal nature out of it. People can see themselves in a story and not feel like someone's shaking their finger at them. And so by making this thing a third person, it actually, I think, helps a person put themselves in the situation a little easier instead of feeling like they're being judged. And so I found the idea more both emotionally helpful, and then also the picture, I think, stays with people longer than just writing principles.
Yeah, and obviously, Jesus taught in parables, and it was almost like it was direct in some ways, because as I was reading Vino Dogmata, I know the issues that you're speaking to. I know some of the people that you're speaking to. So it actually gets to the point in some ways a lot quicker than speaking plainly. But at the same time, it hides some things for kingdom seekers, and I think that's what you do, and that's the strengths that you've been able to bring to North American missiology. As you're thinking about this group, there's 60, some odd practitioners. Most of them are focused on their local church, leading in their networks, leading in their movement. And they might not think of themselves as a writer, and a lot of people don't.
Right.
But how can you encourage them to, at least in some way, document, capture, take a snapshot of the God things that are happening in their midst right now?
Yeah, so most everyone in this room is a part of this room because they're trying to think differently, and somebody has to be able to take the things that are going on between your ears, whether it's you or somebody else doing it for you, and be able to transmit it so this thing is reproducible, even if it doesn't go beyond your local church. Somebody has to take this and put it in a way that it can become lived out, fleshed out by other people. And so I don't think most people start out, I surely didn't start out thinking I'm going to write a book. I was really writing for my people to help them and then I was thinking, well, I need to write to help others around me, because I'm watching the same mistakes over and over again. And I was tired of doing the same conversation over and over again. And so I thought, this is, so yeah, I just think take the opportunities that are in front of you and transmit the thoughts and the spiritual intuition that you have on paper somehow. And then where it goes from there, maybe that isn't always up to us.
Yeah, great. Stephen threw in a question there. I'll ask it to you, and you can answer it in whatever way that's most diplomatic. But in terms of writing, you've chosen to write within and then also outside of your tradition. How important is it for you to disengage, to write from the margins, rather than to just stay in your lane and write towards your tradition?
It's a really good question. So this has been a struggle of mine because I live in the margins, right? So I'm all of my ministry, all my church planting has been in Canada, where there's never been a dominant population of Christians, and so what we're learning in the places where we're planting, I hadn't necessarily seen written in other places, and so I'm looking at how do I take the ideas. Then when I was moved into more of a corporate identity in terms of a bigger substructure of a denomination, it was hard for me. It really was. It was hard for me to know how to say things in a way that wouldn't create a ruckus. And I finally found out I couldn't. But now in a sense, I do feel a lot more freedom than I had in the past. And so yeah, it's there's no real easy way to skin that one.
It sounds like you just get to a point where you just bite the bullet and you have to be true to yourself.
Yeah, I think a lot of people get to that point. Yep.
Yeah. Well, that's really helpful. Last question. A lot of us are, we're pastoring, we're leading local churches. We might not have the capacity to write at the level that we want to, but any advice in terms of like putting in the work of writing, especially early on when you're a little bit younger and you still have, day-to-day pastoral ministry?
Yeah. Well, Daniel, you know that I think I have 5 jobs right now cobbled together to make life work. And even before, when I wrote, I mostly wrote on my own time, which meant sometimes it's 4 a.m. till 8 a.m. That was my writing time. And so it is a sacrifice to write. There's no one going to pay you to do it. You don't make money by doing it. Ed will tell you, you don't make money by writing Christian books. And so everything that you do in writing is a sacrifice, and your audience is the people that you just sense the Lord is saying, help them understand something. And so you write with that kind of heart and that passion in mind. And so it just becomes another form of ministry. But I think the form for me is the backside of the sacrifice of doing it is the serendipitous conversations you have along the way with people you've never known, you would have never known, and you have a conversation with somebody in a hallway someplace going, dude, when you wrote that, that changed everything for me. And they began to unpack that. And I've had that conversation with people whose books I have read, and they've affected me dramatically. And so I think the sacrifice, you just have to do it. There's no easy way. You can't do it in a vacation time. Everything takes too long. But you just have to build the discipline of, to me, I think a certain amount of time on a regular rhythm that becomes the way it happens.
Yeah, so good, Jeff. And I think we'd be a little bit remiss. I mean, Alan is on the call. Alan, good morning. I know you're just getting the sleep out of your eyes there, but really good to see you. Anything that you want to add to Jeff shared? I mean, this is a great, unique time to mentor future thought leaders, future writers. Alan, give you a minute. I mean, anything you want to add to what Jeff shared so far in terms of writing, missiological thinking?
No, I mean, I think he's done a great job. I mean, I do think that writing, don't dismiss it. I do think that, podcasts and all that are, what people listen to, but I think in the end, you have to get substantial material down in order to change the way if you're going to write missiologically, you have to do it that way. And I would encourage people, as I think Jeff has, to don't just write any old book. Don't just publish, I mean, it's fine, publish your sermons and all that, but in the end, that doesn't add value. I think write something that contributes to our understanding of things, and write something that takes a little more time to get out of you, and struggle with it, and write a book that changes the conversation. I think that's the challenge I'd like to give. A lot of the people here can do this. Don't settle for something else. Write something that really makes a difference. And I did say, there are ways now with self-publishing and what we call hybrid publishing, that you can actually, if you're clever about this, you can definitely publish in a way that can produce some finance as well. So I've given you a link on that, but there are other ways too. But I think it can happen. It didn't happen 10 years ago, but you can do that now, and I think you should be wise about it.